Hey everyone, this is Brian Schwabe from Brian's Corner with the Student Physical Therapist. And in today's episode, we are interviewing Ziad. He is a private practice owner in Los Angeles, California. He's also known as Ignite Physio on social media. And we would love to kind of hear back from you guys after this episode on some things that you'd like to hear in the future. But for today, we are interviewing Ziad. Welcome to the show.
Hey, Brian, thanks for having me, man. I really appreciate it.
No problem. Obviously we've talked a little bit in the past, but, for our viewers out there, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your background?
Yeah, so I've been a PT for going on 10 years this year. So I got my undergrad from Cal State Fullerton back in '05, graduated from USC, got my doctorate from there in 2010. And so I've been basically in outpatient ortho ever since I got out of school. The big thing for me has been the shift in the focus on treating more athletes. And that's where my heart lies. And that's where I really do get the most joy out of providing rehab for people. And so I've tried to create that a little bit more by kind of branching out on my own the last couple of years. But I had the traditional path after school. I went and worked for a couple of private practices, had a really eclectic mix of patients that I saw. And I was able to get a lot of experience that way. And I really value a lot of the experience that I got over the time. And I think it's helped set me up for where I am now in terms of having my own practice.
Yeah, that's super interesting. And I know you've had your own practice for, is it 2-3 years now, or how long has it been?
I just hit 2 years last month. So it's a little over 2 years now.
Okay. And, obviously we've seen as far as social media, you treat a ton of athletes and you see quite a bit of ACLs as well. Can you tell us a little bit about your practice, how that started and kind of what your experience has been? Because I understand you do a lot of cash as well.
Yeah. So being in traditional outpatient ortho, I've seen the good and the bad. I mean, there's places that do it well, that take insurance and that are in network practices, and then there are places that I don't think do it as well. And I think that their volume is the focus. And I got to work at my last place in a place that was a little bit more heavy on volume, and we tried our best to provide quality care, and I thought we did a pretty good job of it overall. But the seeing multiple people an hour, 3 people an hour, sometimes more than that, it just wears on you after a while. And I think it's good to get reps and you get to actually put your hands on people and work with people of a bunch of different backgrounds and diagnoses. But the issue becomes, are you giving them everything you feel like you can give them as a therapist? And I don't know that that's the case anymore when you see that much volume. And so for me, the way it started is I joined a couple of forums on Facebook, funny enough, and seeing that there were other people out there that were doing this one-on-one model and sort of branching out away from this in-network model where they just take every insurance under the sun. I just saw that it was possible. And I think that if it's done right, you can really provide people with some care that I think a lot of people value. And I do think there are people who are willing to pay for, out of pocket for care and rehab that they're just not getting anywhere else. And it just doesn't really exist when you go to a traditional in-network clinic. And so that's how this started. And I just decided that I wanted to be able to decide who I worked with. I want to work with motivated, active people. I don't want to work with people who are just sent there because their insurance tells them to, or their doctor tells them to, or their workers' comp tells them to be there. I want people who want to get better, and I want people who are going to be invested in their care. And being able to branch into this one-on-one model, I think, has allowed me to do that.
Yeah, that's great. I think, more and more you're seeing more physios try to do that. I think many would like to do that, but I think some of them are scared or they don't understand some of the challenges. What were your biggest challenges when you started out, and what are the challenges now as you've been established for 2 years now?
I think the early on, the biggest challenge is knowing when to make that leap. I think with the way I did it, and I've talked to a lot of other practice owners that are doing the same model, is I don't think the jumping full bore into it is necessarily the optimal way unless you've got these amazing resources and connections, relationships in your community. So I started off by working per diem and doing home health on the side while I built this practice. And so I think my first week in business, a little over two years ago, I had 2 patient visits that week. The rest of the time I'm working per diem and I'm just paying the bills, and I got a family and I have overhead and expenses. And so got to make some money on the side. And then as things grew, I knew I had this safety net behind me, knowing that I can take my time and grow the business the right way. And I think you make better financial and business decisions when you don't feel like you're desperate to make money. And that's not why I got into this in the end of the day anyways. I got into this because I wanted to enjoy going to work every day, and I want to work with people who genuinely want to get better. And so the big thing for me at the beginning was making sure I had something lined up before I made that leap. And I think that helped a lot. And getting to the actual growing of the business side of things, the hardest thing is just generating leads. Like you really, really have to get yourself out there, because what people like me are doing is not the norm at this point. I mean, we're still in the minority, and so people don't know that this model exists half the time. And so I probably did 2-3 workshops, 3-4 workshops a month, just getting into other gyms, getting into the communities that I wanted to be a part of, and just giving away a lot of value for free. I gave away a lot of free evals, a lot of free consultations, a lot of free workshops. I did a lot of stuff for free that first year, but that's what you have to do in order to get out there. And it's a grind. But I think once you get yourself out in front of enough people, I think that makes the hard part of starting this business a lot easier, because all of a sudden they're going to keep you in mind whenever something does pop up, because they remember you came and you gave them so much value and you're knowledgeable and you know what you're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, value is definitely the what you have to do as a physio and a business owner. And I think, once you establish that rapport and that trust, you're able to start to show some of your skills a little bit more, and your philosophies. And, I think that kind of leads us into what I think we see a lot that you do, at least from a social media aspect, which is tons of ACLs, and you seem to do a really good job with that. Can you tell us a little bit about your experience with ACLs and where that passion comes from, and some of the things you do with it?
Yeah, working in network for as long as I did, I worked for about 7 years in network. And what I saw was there was this huge gap from when the quote unquote, the rehab side of things finished, and they were transitioning, getting back into the gym, or, working with their teams, or whatever the case may be. There was just this huge gap where they didn't really know what to do in order to get back onto the court or the field or whatever their sport was. So for me, the issue became, we've gotten you to a point where your range of motion's back, your swelling is good, your baseline levels of strength are coming along, they're there. But the majority of athletes have just been told what to do in the gym their whole lives. They don't know intimately in terms of what they need to do, especially when you're rehabbing something like an ACL reconstruction. So what I wanted to create was this model where you can blend the two things together, where you can work on the rehab side of things, but at the same time, both of my offices are in huge open space gyms. So I can get somebody downstairs and get them in a trap bar or get a barbell on their back and be able to blend together the quote unquote strength and conditioning side of things with the rehab side. And I think that's what we're missing in ACL rehab, where you have a lot of clinics that don't even have weights that are heavy enough to load our athletes properly. And I think that's the main issue in terms of not loading athletes enough when they're trying to come back and get back to return to sport. And so that's where I felt like that's the bridge I wanted to create. I wanted to be that resource where whether they're working with me the entire rehab process, or they're going somewhere in network and then working with me on the side to be able to feel more comfortable going to the gym so they can get back to their daily activities, their sport, whatever it is that they want to do with their life. I want them to feel comfortable enough to know how to get back to that.
Yeah, I would completely agree with you on the strength side of things. I think most physios and most clinics are not set up for that at all. And even if they are, I think unfortunately the majority aren't either doing it or don't know how to do it, one or the other. But if you look at return to sport criteria, if we look at beyond what these HOP tests do and everything else, the strength measures for, let's say, a football player that has to play a Division I or Division II or Division III level, they got to squat 300-400 pounds to be considered average for their sport, right? So if you don't get them back to that, is it really return to sport, right? So I think, listen, what you're doing is exactly what my philosophy is as well, and I think that's great, because we don't see that enough, and you have a great model to be able to do that. Now you have a scholarship program as well for your ACLs, is that correct?
Yeah. So one of my clients, her and her husband were very generous, and so they wanted to basically give back, because she's going through her ACL rehab right now. And so they wanted to give back, and they know how daunting this process is and how long that the rehab lasts and getting back to feeling, quote unquote normal again. And so what they actually donated, they gave us a donation and said, hey, I want you to be able to help people that really can't either afford to do this, or they don't have the resources available. It's just not open to them. And I want to see if we can find some people that we can help with this money. And so what we decided to do is we decided to sponsor 2 people who have torn their ACLs, want to get back to sport life, whatever it is that they want to get back to. And we're going to sponsor their rehab and provide some equipment for them, be able to give them tools to be able to work on stuff at home, hopefully be able to get to a point where this is my kind of in the future, thinking about this down the line, but be able to give them gym memberships, provide them a lot of things that they just don't have access to right now. We want to find people who really just don't have the resources available that I wish everybody did have access to. So we're going to start off by highlighting 2 people or sponsoring 2 people, and we're taking submissions right now for anybody in the Southern California area who would qualify for this, and hopefully helping 2 people out that really wouldn't have had quality care otherwise.
That is awesome. That is so awesome. How do people find that? Because I'd love to throw you a plug that way for that, because that's really awesome.
Yeah, so we on my Instagram page, my link is a Linktree site, and so if you click on that, there's going to be a place to submit and to actually submit the submission for this. And so if you know of anybody, go to my Instagram, click on that link, and you'll be able to submit for that.
Awesome. Yeah, well, I'll definitely do that. I'll make sure that we highlight that as well after this episode, because I think that would be so amazing for 2 or 3 people that you're going to sponsor for that. And I'd love to see the results of that, because I don't think that's being done at all ever. And that's something really unique.
Well, at the end of the day, man, I mean, I have a lot of very giving and generous patients that cross my paths. But at the end of the day, like we're in the service business, so we serve our communities. And regardless of whether we own our own businesses, you work at an outpatient clinic, at a hospital, whatever setting you're in. I mean, I think that we just never can get rid of that being able to serve our communities and have that in our hearts, because at the end of the day, that's why we got into this profession to begin with. And so I think we need to continue giving back to our communities however we can.
100%. Now, as going kind of picking back off of the ACL talk, tell me a little bit about your philosophy with return to sport, because you obviously see a lot of athletes, and you see a ton of ACLs. So tell me a little bit about your return to play or return to sport process.
Yeah, I think the big gap is, we're not testing enough, and we're not actually formally assessing our athletes as they go through the ACL rehab process. And so the way I've approached it is trying to, Brian, like our research is not where it needs to be right now. It's not as far along as we would all like it to be, but I think it's a lot further along than it was 5 years ago. So I think we know a lot more now than we did 5 years ago. And so at the end of the day, like utilizing what the research says and trying to leverage that as best as we can. I've tried to create that in this setting. And again, not having access to all the high level equipment, force plates, isokinetic machines, things like that. Like not having access to that is a big deal. But at the end of the day, there are ways for us to be able to incorporate that into what we're doing on a day-to-day basis. And so I basically taken the point of looking at multiplanar movement patterns, watching them move, looking at hop testing, and looking at them moving in both the sagittal and frontal plane, and getting an idea of how well they can move, and comparing that side to side. And then also utilizing, I utilize a hanging scale as a way of measuring force production for the quads and the hamstrings in kilograms, and being able to at least have an idea if there's these huge gaps between the left quad and the right quad, hamstrings, quad to hamstring ratio, whatever the case may be. So I think at the end of the day, as long as we're what we try to do is at least assess on a 4 to 6 week basis, and then create a rehab or a strength and conditioning block based off of that. And it gives us an idea of what strategies to use and what to focus on target on. Because I think otherwise you're just throwing principles at somebody and not knowing whether that's something they really need to work on or not. And so the main thing for us is being able to go through this. We do it about every 4 to 6 weeks, and it includes hop testing. It includes strength measurements. It includes the wide balance test. We do drop jumping. We do all sorts of movement patterns and just get an idea of where they're at, and then hope that it translates as best as possible into our rehab and into their sport.
That's great. I think it's huge to do testing batteries. I think we've learned over the last couple of years that it's more of a continuum, right? And if you're not retesting constantly, then you don't know where you're at with things. And I think it also helps the athlete too, because it helps them see their progress, or helps them see, hey, we're not quite where we need to be, but we're getting closer. And this is why this, next plan of care is going to help you kind of get there.
And at the end of the day, we know this rehab is 6, 9, 12, 15 months long. This is a grind, and it's a journey. And so being able to give them wins along the way, where you say, like, look where you were 6 weeks ago and look where you are now, and see how much of an improvement you've made over that time. Like, those are the little micro wins that need to happen over the course of the continuum in order for them to stay engaged and stay on top of the rehab process. Because otherwise you get lost in the shuffle. I mean, I'm sure you've seen it. I've seen so many times where people get 3, 4, 5 months in, and you're doing very similar things, and it feels like it's a never-ending process, and then they just kind of drop off, and you don't see them for a while. And then all of a sudden they come back, and you gotta try to pick up the pieces from where they were before. And so keeping them engaged and keeping them on top of things, that's why I have a whole part of my business that is just testing on athletes who want to come in and just get tested, and they just want to know where they're at so that we know what to work on, and I'll create a program for them to do on their own. Like, they don't even have to come see me in order to do that. But I just want people knowing that there are options out there to be able to at least get the testing done so you get an idea of where you're at.
Yeah, that's great. It's so important. And you're 100% right that they almost get bored at that 5 or 6 month process, right? Or time frame, because they don't know where they're supposed to be. But that's our job. Our job is to better educate. And it's also our job to make sure we're continuously testing. And I think it's great that you're using those hanging scales. I just started playing around with a crane scale myself. I think it's a great way to test, and when you don't have an isokinetic machine. So the more you can test, the better, because it gives them objective criteria.
And at the end of the day, testing is better than not testing. So if you're testing something and you're assessing, you're better than 80% of the other people that are out there anyways, because they're not doing that anyways.
Exactly. All right. So just to kind of wrap this whole thing up, this has been great. I want to, obviously you have your business, you have tons of ACL things, you got the scholarship thing going on. I think you do some online things as well. Tell me where you see yourself in the next 5 or 10 years.
Yeah, like my goal is to obviously scale this business. I want to be able to help as many people as I possibly can. So eventually bringing on more PTs, having multiple locations. Where eventually my ultimate goal, and this is probably within the next 3 to 5 years, is to have my own freestanding location where it's more of a performance center, where we have a blend of everything under one roof. So I would love to be able to get strength coaches and speed and agility coaches, and be able to get everybody in one place, being able to provide just a one-stop shop for those athletes. And so that's definitely down the line for me as well in terms of what I want to do. And on the ACL side, I would just love to be able to partner or work with other people around the country who are and come up with a way to be able to best serve this population that is as underserved as it gets. And this, I hate using the term epidemic. I don't want to say it's an epidemic, but I do think the amount of ACL tears that are happening across the country, across the world, are just ridiculous at this point. And there's a lot of things that we can do from a prevention standpoint. So this year, I really am going to work on getting involved more in the prevention aspect of things, getting out into the community with local high schools, colleges, things like that, and just working on some very actionable, easy steps for them to be able to at least provide some prevention type principles into their warm-ups, into their training, to hopefully stem the tide a little bit and make these ACL tears happen a little bit less.
Awesome. Love it, man. How can people find you? And again, can you remind us how to find out more about that scholarship one more time?
Yeah, so easiest ways to find me would be I'm most active on my Instagram, so it's Ignite Physio. Physio is PHYZIO. Hit me up, send me a DM there, send me a message there. I'll get back to you as soon as I can. Email is ignitephysio@gmail.com. And then in terms of the ACL scholarship, the best way to do that is if you go to my Instagram page, there'll be a link in my bio. You click on that and there'll be a link for you to click on in order to apply for that ACL scholarship.
Awesome. All right. You heard him. That's how you find him. Thanks again for coming on. We really appreciate it. Hopefully everyone got some good information out of that. And now you know how to find him. And for more information and to see more on this stuff, go ahead and check out the Student Physical Therapist. And we'll see you next time. Thanks again.
All right, appreciate it, man.